Hi folks, Dave here with Creek Beaters TV. We'd like to welcome you back this week and tell you that we're going to go ahead and finish off this three-part series of the fall transition and setting up patterns for your bass. Part one, we went out and we found a pattern. We ended up throwing the little Johnson paddle tail swimmers, and we were hitting the creeks, hitting the rocks right at the banks where little bait fish that I've discovered while I was fishing were darting in and out of these rocks, and bass were sitting there waiting to hit them when they came out. A week later, we went out there and established a pattern where we fished parallel to the bank, approximately 10 feet or so off the bank, and what we thought had happened there was the water had cooled down to where the bait fish were going down to deeper water for a little warmer water, and the bass were down there feeding on them down there. Well, this is part three, okay? And what I wanted to do, what I realized in those other two videos was that I was catching a lot of small bass, and I wanted to catch bigger bass. So that's what we did in this episode here. We targeted the bigger bass, okay? And the fish I did catch, I didn't catch as many. You got to look at that now. Whenever you're fishing, targeting bigger fish, you don't normally catch as many fish as you do when you catch little guys. And so the count's down. So now I guess you're basically trading quality for quantity, and vice versa. Now let's talk about the fall transitions and how the waters work in the fall. It's a cool concept, and I don't know that a lot of people really understand. Fish are triggered by cooler water temperatures and the shorter days. Your nighttime gets here a lot sooner, and that triggers them into feeding for the fall, okay? And what they'll do is they'll really feed up and get really heavy, try to put on as much weight and as much weight in as little time as they can, and that's what they're trying to do. So they start a feeding frenzy on all these small bait fish, crawdads, crawfish, whatever's around. But that's what they do in the fall. Okay, now I say that the cooler temperatures, I'm talking about this summer to fall transition, okay? I got notes down here, so I'm hitting my notes here just to see or make sure that I'm hitting the points I want to hit. Okay, so the first part of the summer to fall transition is difficult. And the reason for that is your water is separated into three columns throughout the summer. You have a top water, or the top column of the water. They all have scientific names, and I don't know the names of them. I mean, I'll put them up on the screen for you. But I just know one really important one, and I'm sure you've heard of it as a bass fisherman. It's called a thermocline, okay? Well, your top section of water has oxygen in it, but not as much as your thermocline. You have three different sections. You got a top, a middle, and a bottom. And when in the fall time, when these temperatures start to cool down, the water starts to cool down, your waters all your layers will dissipate and become one, okay? The top layer has a sufficient amount of oxygen, but you'll notice that you don't catch a lot of fish in the summertime because I say a lot, on top water and things like that, because they're just not up in there feeding. Your thermocline is a small band of water in the center, okay? And that's where oxygen tends to settle, and it's a highly oxygenated area. That's normally where you'll catch your fish, be it bass, carp, catfish, whatever. That's where you catch most of your fish, is in that thermocline area in the center. The bottom part of the waters in the summertime are pretty much void of oxygen, and fish if they're down there, they're lethargic. They won't feed down there. They're not active at all. Just imagine you holding your breath and trying to chase down food or something. That's what they do. They'll come up into this thermocline and up into the higher water columns to feed. Anyway, in the fall, when those temperatures drop, all those levels dissipate, and when they dissipate, that oxygen level that was up here and the thermocline that had a high oxygen level and the dead water all mingle, which takes that oxygen level throughout the whole water system, and it makes the oxygen levels in the entire water system really low. So your fish start off being lethargic. They don't feed very much during that time. Okay, and you got to look too. The upper level of the water is warmer, and it gets cooler as it goes down. And then that, with that water flipping in the winter, in the fall, it goes cool to warm, and it messes with their metabolism and so on. Now, what you want to do to fish the fall waters, you want to find grasses. Because the grasses put off oxygen in the water, and more oxygen in water means more active fish. Also, creeks are really good to fish in the fall. Creeks and river systems, and where they run into the like a reservoir or whatever, that's really good, because that moving water brings oxygen in, and again, high oxygen means high activity. Now let's talk about the food, their fall feeding patterns that bass will do. Okay, they start feeding real heavily for the winter. Like I said, because winter, that cold water makes them really lethargic. So what they do is they tend to feed in areas where they can trap bait fish. Okay, that might be an underground point where the bass can come into this point here, and bam, these bait fish go to get away, and they hit this, they have to go up and over. It can be any little grass. Grasses might, any place that the grasses might trap the fish, any place that might trap those bait fish. Like I said, grasses, creek banks, things like that, that would trap bait fish to where they can feed heavily on it. So that's where you'd want to focus and concentrate your fishing. Think about it. If you could find grasses in a creek, by a creek bank, and it's holding those bait fish, highly oxygenated water, high activity, that's a pretty good place to fish. So some places to fish for those would be backs of creeks, anywhere where bass can trap the bait. That's just how it works. Late fall, creek channels and banks are good to fish, because fish you have your bait fish that have gone up into this creek system. See, they're just like the bass. They're predatory. They're feeding on whether it's plankton or smaller fish or whatever. They're doing the same thing the bass are doing to them. So as they go up in these creeks, bass chase them to eat them while they're eating whatever they're chasing. And so a good place to fish coming into the late fall is those creek banks, where they'll follow those creek banks down, keeping some kind of cover between them and their predators, and they'll come out to the deeper water, where in the wintertime they will all kind of go down to the very bottoms of the water systems, so that they can survive through the winter. So that's that's some of, it's not everything, obviously it's not all the information but it's a lot of information on how the fisheries work from the summer to fall to winter transitions. Now, how I fish the waters during the fall transition, and I've done it in these videos, is I usually start with the top water. Okay, remember that top layer of water has got a little more oxygen in it, and it's there's a little more activity. This year's really been slow on top bites, and I'm not sure why. I mean, well, I guess I am sure why. We've had a really pretty dry summer, so that, that fresh, clean, oxygenated water that's being introduced into those systems isn't there this year, so they're kind of hanging out in that thermocline more than anywhere else. That thermocline being that center section is really highly oxygenated. But I've been throwing the top water, or that's how I start off with the body. I'll throw a top water bait and see if I can't pick up something there, because that's a bait that I move quickly, and it helps you find fish. You know what I mean? So if that fails, I'll go to something like a square bill crankbait. And the reason I do square bills is because it's not a real deep diver. So, and it depends on your water systems, obviously. But I like to keep it in the upper 2/3 of the water column. So a square bill works great for that, and the bass usually will destroy that. So that's what I like to start off. I like to do the top water, normally a buzzbait or whopper plopper or something like that, and then I go to the square bill. Do throw some crankbaits, but I just don't throw a whole lot of deep divers. Like I said, I don't want to go below that thermocline. The water systems that we fish here in Indiana really aren't that deep, the ones that we fish. So that's why I stay upper 2/3. Something you can do, then, okay, I'm sorry. Once I go off of that, once I leave those, if those aren't producing or they do produce a little bit or whatever, that's when I'll throw what you see in this video. I throw the big Magnum, Zoom Magnum worms, and you'll see here in this video that it works. It's a pretty good technique to use. So it's I'm gonna have to say probably my favorite way of fishing is with the worms. Now these are 10.5-inch Zoom worms. The bigger the better in the fall, from the summer to fall transition, because bass don't want to waste a lot of time chasing fish. Okay, they want the biggest meal they can get all at one time. So that's, the bigger baits, they hit them pretty heavy and pretty rapidly. But that's what we do is I'll fish those 3 baits primarily in the fall. When you're fishing for big bass, what you want to do is they're like a deer, they're being tucked in, they're in their cover, they're in hiding, and any movement, bam, they're done. They're out of there. They're not going to mess around with you. So what you do is you keep your movements, keep your noise to a minimum when you're fishing for big bass. Think about it like this. If you were in your bed sleeping at night and something comes, something makes a noise in the house, you have somebody come in the house, you're probably not going to get up and go make a sandwich. It's just not what it's not what on your mind. What's on your mind is to get stealthy and think, okay, now wait a minute, what is this that I'm hearing and seeing, and I have to assess the situation. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich is not my friend right now. And that's how large bass are. The big bass, they didn't get big for being dumb, okay? But what they do is if they see you coming up the banks, they hear you stuff bouncing off your boats, you catch a fish, you're screaming and yelling and things like that, they tend to shy away and say, what's going on out there? It's self-preservation. I got to preserve myself. And eating is not on their list. So when fishing for the bigger bass, try to be quiet, try to be stealthy, try not to make a whole lot of noise, and throw the bigger baits. So hopefully this has helped you in some way. If you have any questions or any ideas or anything for videos, let us know, man. Just hit us on the email, creekbeaterstv@gmail.com, and hit us up and give us a little feedback. So that is your summer to fall transition, and it's not everything you need to know, but it's a really good place to start. So I'm Dave. It's been Creek Beaters TV. Thanks for watching, guys.
What are you talking about? Creek Beaters TV? That's awesome.